Something happened in the final pages of the Bible that most people never stop to question. Because men separated by centuries and living under different empires describe visions that sound strikingly modern, filled with beasts rising from the sea, a global system that controls buying and selling, fire falling from the sky, and a mark tied directly to economic survival, which raises a difficult question. Were these merely symbolic expressions shaped by their own time, or were they witnessing something far beyond it? Something that reads less like distant poetry and more like a calculated warning about a world that now looks uncomfortably familiar. This matters now because we are living in an age defined by global networks, digital currencies, artificial intelligence, satellite surveillance, and instant worldwide influence. And never before has humanity been so interconnected or power so centralized, which makes ancient prophecy feel less like myth and more like a mirror reflecting patterns that repeat across history: empires, rising moral boundaries, collapsing systems, tightening control societies drifting from restraint. Those patterns are once again forming before our eyes. When the prophet Daniel wrote during the Babylonian exile under the Neo-Babylonian Empire, he described a vision of 4 beasts emerging from a turbulent sea: a lion with eagle's wings, a bear raised on one side, a leopard with 4 heads, and finally a terrifying 4th beast. Unlike anything before it, and historians have long recognized these as symbols of successive empires such as Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, and Rome. Yet Daniel's vision did not end with Rome, because he described a final phase marked by 10 horns, fragmentation, and a smaller horn rising with unusual authority, speaking boldly, changing laws and consolidating power in a way that forces us to ask whether he was describing a single ruler, a political system, or something far more complex. Centuries later, on the island of Patmos, the Apostle John wrote the book of Revelation under Roman persecution, and he also described a beast rising from the sea with 10 horns and 7 heads, receiving authority over every tribe, people, language, and nation, which in the 1st century would have sounded impossible, since Rome, though vast, did not control the entire globe, and communication was slow while cultures remained isolated. Yet John envisioned a system with global reach that extended beyond anything his era had seen. John then described a 2nd beast that performs signs, persuades the world, and causes all people, rich and poor, free and slave, to receive a mark on the right hand or forehead without which no one could buy or sell. And in the ancient world, where commerce required physical trade, markets were local, identity was personal, and no centralized digital ledger existed, this seemed unimaginable. But today, in an era defined by biometric identification, facial recognition, implantable microchips, and digital currencies tracked in real time, while central bank digital currencies are explored by major economies and financial systems, can be activated or restricted with code, the imagery feels strikingly relevant, raising the question of whether John foresaw technology itself or simply described power and loyalty in the only language available to him. The imagery intensifies as Revelation speaks of fire falling from heaven in the sight of humanity, which in the ancient mind signified divine judgment. Yet in the modern world, what falls from the sky are missiles, drones, and potentially orbital weapons. And for the first time in recorded history, humanity possesses the capacity to destroy entire cities with fire descending from above, creating an unsettling convergence between ancient symbolism and modern capability. Jesus, in the Gospels, warned of wars and rumors of wars, of nation rising against nation, of famines, earthquakes, lawlessness increasing, and love growing cold. And while none of these events are unique to our era, since they have marked human history for centuries, what distinguishes our time is the scale and speed at which they unfold. Because a regional conflict now affects global markets within minutes, a virus can spread across continents in weeks, and a single social media post can ignite worldwide movements overnight. The prophets foresaw turmoil, moral confusion, and deception so convincing that even the faithful could be misled. And in a world shaped by deepfakes, AI-generated voices, algorithmic manipulation, and carefully curated realities, deception has reached unprecedented sophistication. Yet perhaps the most overlooked detail in these prophecies is not destruction, but dependency. Because the final system described in Revelation does not immediately force compliance at sword point, but integrates individuals through convenience, participation, and promises of security, making the mark less about visible oppression and more about voluntary alignment. Throughout history, empires have consolidated control during crisis, as Rome's centralized power during instability. The collapse of the Weimar Republic paved the way for authoritarian leadership in Germany, and major global conflicts gave birth to international institutions, promising order and stability, revealing a consistent pattern in which crisis creates opportunity and fear cultivates compliance. Echoing the prophetic warnings of a leader or system rising amid chaos, offering peace and solutions, while gradually demanding allegiance. Daniel spoke of one who confirms agreements only to later break them, while John described a world marveling at the beast and asking who could compare or wage war against it, suggesting not immediate terror but admiration, AEW, and eventual submission, which leads to a revelation hidden in plain sight. The prophets were not merely predicting specific technologies, but describing enduring patterns of human nature, amplified by centralized power, including control of commerce, manipulation of truth, global influence, and populations willing to exchange freedom for perceived security. The final prophetic visions focus less on technological advancement and more on moral transformation, asking whether humanity becomes more just or more divided, more truthful or more easily deceived, more compassionate or increasingly cold. And Revelation itself begins not with monsters but with letters, warning communities about complacency, compromise, and moral drift, implying that the external beast reflects an internal condition long before it manifests as a global system. What the last prophets truly saw was not merely a tyrant, a mark, or catastrophe, but a technologically advanced yet spiritually unstable world, politically connected yet morally fractured, capable of global governance, and vulnerable to its own creations. Witnessing the culmination of patterns repeated for thousands of years but now accelerated beyond precedent. When Daniel wrote, he lived under empire, and when John wrote, he suffered exile by empire. And both understood the mechanics of power and oppression, yet both also described hope beyond the system, because every beast in Daniel's vision eventually falls, and every empire in history, Babylon, Persia, Greece, Rome, has collapsed, confirming that the message was never that such systems would last forever, but that they would rise in predictable ways. The real question, therefore, is not whether prophecy is unfolding exactly as imagined, but whether we are recognizing the pattern as it forms, noticing when surveillance expands under the banner of safety, questioning when financial systems become programmable, pausing when truth becomes fluid and narratives shift overnight, and understanding that the prophets wrote in symbols precisely because symbols transcend time. A beast can represent Rome, a future coalition, or a globalized power structure. A mark can symbolize allegiance, identity, or economic integration. Fire from heaven can represent divine judgment or technological warfare. The imagery adapts to each era, yet the pattern remains consistent, revealing a trajectory toward unity without accountability, power without restraint, and systems that promise salvation while demanding submission. The last prophets did not leave fear alone, but offered awareness that history moves in cycles, that moral decay often precedes collapse, that centralized power eventually overreaches, and that every generation believes it is immune until it discovers it is not. So what they truly saw may have been humanity, standing at a crossroads capable of unprecedented cooperation and unprecedented control, poised on the edge of technologies once unimaginable in a world where prophecy feels less distant and more tangible. The question is not whether we are in the final chapter, but whether we are paying attention. Because if the patterns are repeating, then the warning is not about predicting an end date, but about recognizing the signal, discerning it amid the noise, and deciding how we respond before that noise grows so overwhelming that the signal can no longer be heard. This has been the last signal, and the transmission remains clear. Stay alert.